Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I expect this to be a highly informative and thought-provoking colloquium here at UCI and IPS. My name is Mike Hyland. I'm an assistant professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department, also an affiliate of the Institute of Transportation Studies here. My research is on modeling and analysis of transportation systems. I don't have any background at all. I did write one paper on resilience as it relates to shared automated vehicles. So I think I'll be learning as much as anyone in the audience today, and I'm looking forward to doing that. I'm excited to have our panelists here today. We have experts from Hawaii, Alberta, Canada, and UC Irvine, as well as the Assistant Fire Chief from the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. As I hope you know, the topic of today's colloquium is navigating disaster, transportation, and extreme events. Somewhat unfortunately, this is an evergreen topic. Natural disasters are not going anywhere anytime soon. And so trying to understand them better and predict, prepare for, respond to, and mitigate these disasters and these extreme events is a very important topic. Just quickly here, an anecdote. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania originally, which is considered usually on most lists one of the cities or regions that's least likely to experience natural disaster. But last week, the whole city lost power and the surrounding region lost power because of a major windstorm. I think the lesson here is that even low risk areas are not at zero risk of natural disasters. And of course, as we'll hear in a little bit, there's also man-made disasters, which are another major challenge that can cause extreme events. So as I said, there are many challenges associated with preparing for, mitigating, and responding to extreme events. Today, we'll hear about some of these challenges and some potential solutions for addressing these challenges. All right, so now I'm switching from my role as introducer to moderator of this session. Welcome myself up to the stage. So the agenda for today is as follows. We have 4 speakers, 4 panelists. They will each give a presentation, after which you can individually ask them questions. Once the 4 speakers are done, then we'll invite them up to this nice set of tables up here with our virtual speaker, Dr. Karl as well. And we'll have the opportunity to ask them questions collectively, some of the major challenges forward thinking. I'm going to invite my former PhD student, current postdoc, Young-Hoon Bach, to hand out papers and pens so that you can write down your questions, and then I can use those written questions to help moderate the panel at the end of, or in the middle of our day today. Okay, without further ado, our first speaker is Dr. Karl Kim, here joining us remotely from the University of Hawaii. He's a professor of urban and regional planning at the University of Hawaii. He's also the founding director of the Disaster Management and Humanitarian Assistance Program. I welcome all the speakers to broaden their introduction, introduce themselves more. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Karl Kim.
Thank you. Can I share screen?
Yes, hope so.
Are you seeing my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Hang on here. Okay. Okay. You see everything?
Yes.
Yeah. As Mike indicated, I'm a professor at the University of Hawaii, and I currently direct a FEMA-funded national center, the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center. I have to begin with a with a statement that what I'm speaking about is the work I do as a professor at the University of Hawaii, and I have to be very careful about what I say these days about FEMA, as you know, that there are current changes underway. What I really am, if you look me up, is a transportation planner, and I'm interested in all modes of transportation and the connection between infrastructure projects like the Cheonggyecheon project in Korea, which took an elevated highway and restored this stream area. A lot of the work that I've been focusing on is this connection between travel and hazards and topics like evacuation and so forth. We developed for FEMA training courses on evacuation planning and so forth. And so My work really is at the intersection of travel and hazards. I'm sort of known locally as Dr. Disaster, just because I've been intrigued by different types of hazards and threats, and Hawaii, as you may know, has many different types of hazards, active volcanoes, tsunami threats, but also as islands, we're particularly vulnerable to weather and climate related hazards and threats. And so what I want to talk about briefly this morning is the movement of people and goods and services and ideas, and then some of the barriers that have come up. And I think we can think about these barriers both spatially and over time. Actually, this image shows the movements of people to evacuation shelters that are located in the flood zones. Increasingly, there's been a lot of attention to issues of borders and boundaries and security concerns. I would like to point out that natural hazards don't seem to respect these borders and boundaries, that they cross jurisdictions. And one way of thinking about this is that hazards become emergencies when bad things happen, and then emergencies become disasters when local capacity to manage is overwhelmed, and that you need outside assistance. And then catastrophes occur when it's beyond the scale of what we've seen. And I think we need to consider the whole range of preparedness, prevention, response, mitigation, adaptation. And the most challenging work is related to recovery. And I think research, education, training, exercise, and capacity building plays an important part in this. There are three ideas I want to focus on. Who and what is vulnerable? And then I think that's tied to the importance or the criticality of technology. And then the main thing I really want to talk about and propose some further research and collaboration on notions of equity, horizontal and vertical, and fairness and justice. And I want to argue that transportation has a particularly important role to play in that. And I think one way of beginning is thinking about who's at risk, who's vulnerable, the people, the structure, the places. And what we have to think about are multiple hazards that occur in part because of the movement before, during, and after different events occur, whether they're flooding, the most common, or geophysical. In Hawaii, we have active volcanoes and other geologic hazards, and these can be impacted. And this is a picture of some of my students on the Big Island looking at an abandoned vehicle. And I think that there are these other hazards related to heat and drought and wildfire. Increasingly, we have more and more weather and climate related disasters, a multiplicity of different types of hazards and threats. You can see, I think in 2023, we set a record for the number of billion-dollar weather disasters. Even the Maui fires in August of 2023 actually made that national list as well too. And so we've been doing some work on the Lahaina fires as well too. There are over 100 fatalities, thousands of injuries, thousands of buildings destroyed. There were 2,777 motor vehicles which were left behind, and over 5,000 people that were displaced and needed to be sheltered. Job losses, billions in economic losses, and then damage to the environment, health, and society. If you look at the profile of the fatalities, interestingly, up 62% were male. Many were older adults, many with persons with disabilities and chronic conditions. We've kind of mapped and analyzed when and where these fatalities have occurred. Many were trying to escape, and they were either outside or in the motor vehicles as well too. If we look at Lahaina, we see some similarities, although I want to point out that in spite of how big and how extensive the fires were, there were only 28 fatalities. So LA did get some things right. Again, the numbers in terms of hospitalizations, numbers in terms of evacuation, and even the numbers in terms of destroyed structures, these are just rough estimates. And every time I turn around, there are more updates and changes to this. But we know it's a multi-billion dollar set of events that occurred, and then many ongoing challenges associated with this disaster. And I think when we look at these two, we see some commonalities in terms of who's left behind. And these big questions is why didn't people evacuate, or why didn't they evacuate sooner? And I think part of it has to do with the inadequate detection, alert, and warning systems that we need to invest more in. But then I also think that we need to pay more attention to transportation assets and combining together mass care and other services. I've written a lot on evacuation. I think there's two types of evacuation. It's self-evacuation, where basically it's a congestion management problem, and you want to get self-evacuators information early as possible and give them routes and make sure that they don't run out of gas. Assisted evacuation, paratransit, people that have to be convinced to leave, the people that need to be carried out, that's way more complicated and requires a whole community approach and a diversity of disciplines, combining the hazard sciences, engineering, social work, transportation planning. What we do is use technology to support situational awareness, damage assessment, debris management, and recovery. In addition to satellite, aerial, drone work, we also have acquired the same equipment that Google Street View uses and have built these platforms to do this damage assessment using Google Street View, which is pretty ubiquitous in the US. And then if you look at the image in the center, this shows the work that we did in Maui, showing the Google Street View imagery on the bottom, and then the imagery that we captured after the fires. We did that in California as well too. I was mentioning to Chief Tobias earlier that we drove about 60 miles a day for about 2 weeks and captured comprehensive imagery of Palisades and Altadena to assist in terms of the damage assessment. Some of this is impressionistic, but obviously we're integrating this with our machine vision, machine learning applications to classify objects and events. The most interesting work that we're working on is also integrating this with LiDAR imagery as well too, which is so data rich and in part allows us to identify not just the types of damage that occurred, but also much more detail in terms of the species of trees and so forth. And so a lot of the work that we're doing right now, working with FEMA, working with others, we support the building sciences group of FEMA, trying to understand, for example, why this house, referred to as the miracle house, survived. And if you see the imagery that we captured on the top and compared it to, I think the Google Street View imagery had the 2017 before the fires. This is after the fire, and you can see that they hardened, put on a metal roof, and then also changed the landscaping around this. And in this area, they have the water on one side, but you can see many other structures were destroyed. So we're trying to understand how come this building survived and others did not. And I think roadways, landscaping all plays an important role. And so we can think about technology as, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, it impacts how we live and work and the movement of people and goods and ideas about where and how we build and what we build. A lot of the technology we can use to reduce the risk of fires and other hazards as well, too. The work that I do focuses on the intensity, duration, and frequencies of these different events. The problem, of course, is that many are connected and one hazard leads to another. So you have high winds that contribute especially during a drought period, to increased risk of fire, and then the spread of fire from the forest areas to grasslands to then urban areas really requires a good understanding of the science and the different types of information technologies that are available. There are really difficult, vexing questions about the access, ownership, and the uses and abuses of this information technology. And so much of it is being influenced by politics. There's always been propaganda and profiteering. I mean, one of the things that I've been looking at too is the extent to which big events like 9/11 or Katrina are transformative in terms of and one thing after 9/11 was that transportation research and transportation was transformed in part because all the improvements in access and mobility improve the access for terrorists and people who want to do harm as well too. And so a lot of the work that we have to do is to look at the role of technology and technology failures, the problems. So we had a false alert that occurred several years ago, and the impact that that has on warning systems and getting information and getting people to evacuate when they can. So much of what we have to do is to manage the unintended consequences. It's not just improving access for criminals and terrorists, but also the pandemic was spread really efficiently by the improvements in our transportation systems. We know that roadways, in addition to improving the movement of people, convey runoff and pollution and contaminants. Parking requirements limit walkable communities. I've been doing a lot of research on battery electric vehicles and hydrogen, and they create new hazards. And social media creates more opportunities and challenges for misinformation and disinformation. And I know many of you are doing research on these topics in terms of, and in some ways, it would be easier if we didn't have to deal with the safety and security and surveillance issues and just return to a simpler society. And is there a way to go back and incorporate, this is a vision of Maui, which kind of incorporates both the historical use of wetlands and more green infrastructure, and can we do that? And I think that there's value to incorporating indigenous knowledge and then incorporated into our Constitution, in fact, is the law of the splintered paddle, which was first established by King Kamehameha, in which that every man, woman, and child would be able to travel freely and in peace with the right to lie down, to sleep by the roadside without fear of harm. And I think that this notion of thinking about social vulnerabilities, Susan Cutter and others have done a lot of work on this topic, I think is an update to these ideas about thinking about how we protect the vulnerable and improve the quality of life in places. So I want to propose a topic that I believe that we need to work more on. I edit a journal called Transportation Research Interdisciplinary Perspective, and we're launching a special issue that's on horizontal and vertical equity, transportation justice, fairness. I mean, we know horizontal equities equals are treated equally. And, there's been a lot of attention to procedural justice. And a lot of this relates to the access to information and analytical capabilities and also technology. I'm very, very concerned about this kind of pay to play. If you have money, then you have access to this. And so there are major questions about the distribution of resources and assets and power, and perhaps even redistribution of that. And I think it's really important to remember that knowledge is power, and planning is all about knowledge to action. So again, I want to put in a plug for transportation research interdisciplinary perspective. It was started during the pandemic in 2019, where we all had more time on our hands, right? And it's an open access journal. And already we have our impact factor of 3.9, and we're always looking for authors, reviewers and board members and people to become editors or associate editors. We have special issues. I'm chairing a conference that's coming up in Rotterdam in a few weeks, and I hope to see many of you there. I know there's more than 1,000 people that are attending that transportation research symposium. So if there are ways that we can collaborate, that would be great, particularly on this topic of transportation justice, equity, and fairness. So with that, I'd like to close and open it up if there are questions or comments. How am I doing for time?
We're a little over, but thank you for a great presentation. Oh, we'll give time for if there's one pressing question that someone has for Dr. Kim.
It is probably only pressing to me.
Sure.
Why do you think there were so many more men lost in the fire in Hawaii?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, part of it is that we've been looking at this, that there were more older men with disabilities and that were left at home, that which is part of it. And then the other thing was that always there is some gender imbalance that exists in terms of who stays back or who returns as well too, particularly among the younger groups as well too. Yeah, we're trying to understand that question, and that is one thing that did stand out, that kind of indicated again the need to really look at the social demographic context as well. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you very much. And we'll definitely have questions. I have questions regarding technologies, assisted versus self-evacuation, as well as your comment in the beginning about why recovery is among the most challenging of the stages. So thank you again. Okay, our second speaker is Dr. Elisa Borowski. They're an assistant professor of civil and environmental engineering here at UC Irvine, as well as an affiliate of the Institute of Transportation Studies. So Borowski.
Thank you.
All that feedback. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, I should. Oh, okay, so that looks good on both sides? Does it look good on Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it does.
And then I had to go back.
No?
There you go. Yeah, there.
It's there? Okay.
Oh.
Okay, I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe slideshow and then don't touch it. No? Yes, okay. It's a little delay. Okay. Well, thank you everyone so much for being here today, spending your afternoon with us. Thank you, Dr. Dugesman, for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm really excited to be speaking among a lot of resilience experts who I deeply admire. So I'm very excited. So my dissertation research was very focused on transportation during emergency events. Since coming to UC Irvine about 2 years ago, I've been focusing a little bit more on the chronic stressors and planning transportation for those chronic stressors. But the work I'm going to present today was work I did in my first year here, looking at resilience hubs, and these are infrastructure that's really designed to help communities both during those chronic stressor periods as well as the acute shocks of these extreme events. This is kind of a niche area of study, but we just so happen to have the other person I know of who does resilience hub research, Dr. Stephen Wong, here in the room with us today. And he's published a lot on this topic. So very excited to have him here. Okay, so this is the topic. So in this time when so much is shifting, I think it's kind of helpful to ground this motivation in something that's a little bit more stable and long-lasting, which is the code of ethics of our profession. So whether you're looking at the National Society of Professional Engineers or the American Society of Civil Engineers, both first and foremost hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. That's very much what we do in our resilience research. We can see during these extreme events how important it is to plan for the safety, health, and welfare of the public during extreme events. And this kind of also ties back into what Dr. Karl Kim was talking about with the extreme events that we have here in LA. Each one of these on its own is very extreme, wildfire, flooding, extreme heat. And we also see that these tend to be cascading. One can cause an increase in likelihood of another, or compounding. They happen both at the same time and increase the magnitude of the events. So this was some of my prior research. So just to touch very briefly on my dissertation research. So I was looking at kind of informal shared rides during different extreme events, from some like no notice small scale like relocation events to flood evacuations during the pandemic. And then looking at kind of more formal app-based ride sharing or crowdsourced delivery during different disruptions. And then also how people access social resources, which also kind of ties into the resilience hub idea. So that's sort of the background. So this project that was funded through ITS and RIMI was called Transit Integration with Community Resilience Centers as Social Infrastructure for Hazard Preparedness. Our team here was pretty big, so I worked with Janine Pierce, who is a PhD student in urban planning. We partnered with Climate Resolve, which is a local nonprofit that looks at community-based, sustainable, and resilient solutions. And then we also partnered with one of the first resilience hubs in Los Angeles, which is Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory. So what is a resilience hub? So this is a type of familiar place, such as a community center, a library, a school that is designated as a hub for resilience in that community. During everyday uses, it looks to address root causes of vulnerability, increase dissemination of preparedness messages, strengthen ties, and increase the thriving of the community. And then when there is a disruption, so in LA, a really common one is extreme heat. It's a place where people can gather, access resources, share information, and spearhead the response initiatives. And then in the recovery phase, it's also a place where they can community members can access ongoing resources and information. It's a space where additional experts can come in and have space to coordinate, providing aid for organizations and volunteers, and then identifying the unique needs of the community. So as I mentioned, this case study is in Boyle Heights. So this is an area with a long history of environmental injustice. You can see that it is bordered on 3 sides by freeways. Back in the 1940s, if you look at the redlining maps, it was completely a D grade, so that's the lowest grade it could have in redlining. So this is an area that has experienced a lot of pollution, access to or exposure to toxic chemicals, and they're also having these grassroots bottom-up initiatives to fight back against those challenges. So if this works, I'm just going to play like 30 seconds so you can see what this area looks like.
The reason I want to inspire more cities and communities to focus on resilience hubs is that we've had such a focus on emergency management, response and recovery. And what we're seeing in that response and recovery sort of cycle is that we're stuck in it. And there isn't a lot of resilience then being built in communities. Communities are continuing to just respond and try to come back to where they are. This idea of bouncing back, which is something I don't actually believe is necessary. We want to think about how we're thriving, how our communities are growing. And so resilience hubs are this opportunity to really invest in the community, to invest in the community cohesion, the community connectivity, the sense of belonging, all these other factors that are really important to resilience, and ensure that they're happening in a community trusted space that is safe in a neighborhood. I am really excited to be back.
So that's narrated by Kristen Baja, who is credited with developing this idea of resilience hubs. And this is available online if you want to watch the whole thing, but it's a little bit long. So
First visit.
So for what I'm presenting today, there are a lot of different research questions that guided this work, but I'm going to focus on the transportation vulnerabilities and how those interact with climate vulnerabilities in Boyle Heights. We did three listening sessions from February to August 2024 with 26 adult residents in Boyle Heights that had connections with this resilience hub. So the resilience hub did the recruitment for us. So some of the things I'll share my findings with you about is just kind of baseline mode choice. What does mode usage look like in Boyle Heights? So a lot of people had a car. So people talked about how they liked that their car had AC, or some talked about how their AC wasn't reliable and they didn't like that, or that they're saving up money for a car. They worked really hard to save up money for a car. Some took public transit, but a lot of things we heard is that it's infrequent, unreliable, it's dirty, and it's unsafe. A few people mentioned that they would get rides from friends and family. In terms of rideshare, I'll talk more on the next slide about this because I thought it was really interesting. There was a view that Uber and Lyft were very unsafe, but there was also this kind of community-based rideshare that evolved in the area that community members felt was more trustworthy. In terms of bikes, the infrastructure wasn't really safe enough to ride a bike. The lanes would just end abruptly, like at the end of a bridge or something, that people felt was really unsafe. And then also in terms of e-bikes, they said they had them, but they sort of were just disappearing, or they were afraid to take them because they didn't know who it belonged to. And this person said like it might belong to a gang member, so you just would rather not take it. And then in terms of e-scooters, they also had those, but they were sort of left everywhere. They would be taken apart, so that also wasn't that successful of an initiative. And walking, some people did walk, and they mentioned that parking was so hard to come by that if they had a good spot, they would sometimes just not leave, or they would be more motivated to walk if they could, so that they wouldn't lose their parking spot. So ride sourcing. So this is someone who was talking about this with a participant that only spoke Spanish, and she mentioned a number of occasions on which the Uber or Lyft driver took her to the wrong place, left her somewhere late at night by a bridge in a deserted place, and she had to ask someone else for a ride, and it was really unsafe. Other people mentioned carrying pepper spray while taking an Uber or Lyft, and then also an experience of almost getting robbed while taking Uber or Lyft. And then this personal taxi, so this came up in multiple different sessions. This person refers to it as an underground taxi service, that if you know, you know. And they said there were like stickers on payphones or cards that they would hand out, and they're people that just offer rides when you need them. They might deliver food or groceries or 6-packs to your house. So essential things like that. And other people said that they met someone at a party who did rides and they trusted that person much more than Uber or Lyft. Transit was a really big focus of our listening sessions. So there are a lot of things to share here. So it was an infrequent service. So this person was saying just be prepared, bring water, bring a phone charger, know that you're going to wait 40 minutes to an hour just for a single bus. And sometimes when they come, they're at capacity, so you're going to wait for the next one. They're not clean. So someone was talking about that, like fabric upholstery that is really colorful and designed to hide the dirt, but you can't really clean it. They wanted something that you could clean and disinfect every single time the bus goes back to their stations. They mentioned it being smelly and just in general kind of an unpleasant place to be. The fact that these transit services were unreliable had pretty significant consequences. So one person didn't have a car and he said he couldn't get a job because he doesn't have a reliable mode of transportation because public transit is not reliable. Another person was on parole and they said, you know, if they're getting to their parole meeting and they miss it or they're late, they'll go back to jail. So that's the kind of consequences that they're facing and why they need reliable transportation. Participants mentioned this concept of hostile infrastructure. So this is infrastructure designed to deter people who are experiencing homelessness from kind of hanging out there for a long time. So they said that because of those designs, it's so uncomfortable for everyone to wait at bus stops that it just deters everyone from using it. So there's no shade and there's no seating in this notoriously hot and not green city. A lack of safety. So someone was talking about experiences they had of assault and harassment, and she was even reflecting on when she was in middle school as a minor when this happened to her. But if you think like more police is the answer, it's more complicated than that. There was also a lot of distrust of the Metro Police. We asked about unarmed transit ambassadors, and people felt more trustworthy of the ambassadors. One person said that they felt like the Metro Police had quarrels with people and you take a risk talking to them because you don't know if they're in a bad mood. So then in terms of extreme events, so that we can see how these intersect with each other, heat waves was the one that people talked about the most. This impacted people walking. They didn't want to carry a lot with them, including water. Flooding was another one. So waiting for the bus, people said they would get splashed by cars because the streets were so badly flooded. The pandemic was affecting people's travel. They would mask up still to this day every time they would get on public transit. People talked about blackouts, and this one isn't transportation specific, but a big concern was that their food could go bad in the fridge and they don't have backup, and just not having the savings to be able to replace all that food was a high source of anxiety for folks. And then earthquakes was mentioned as being the thing that created the most kind of climate anxiety. And they talked about how it takes a lot of money to maintain a go bag or a stay box, and they just have to set aside money on a month-to-month basis to maintain that. And then lastly, fire. It was mentioned that people would see the effects of the wildfire smoke when they were outside. So just some ways that these intersect quickly. So with public transit and wildfire, so actually this is a little bit related to hurricanes in this example, but someone was talking about how they're really worried that we don't have enough buses to evacuate people. So they said in Cuba, they have designated buses when they have a hurricane to ship people to the mountains where they're safe. We don't have that here. The government would just let you die. And I've seen that with Hurricane Katrina, and I'm scared of relying on the government for things like that. So there was a lot of distrust of the government and disaster preparedness of the government. Public transit and extreme heat. So people talked about older adults. We didn't have a lot of older adults in our sessions, but our participants did reflect on the experiences of older adults. And they mentioned how these individuals, they still want to get food for their family. They have appointments to go to. They're using walkers, and they're just standing, waiting for the bus in the sun, and how bad that is for them. And then personal vehicles in extreme heat. People were talking about how they viewed the effects of climate change as making people more violent and angry, especially while driving. And they assumed that these were drivers without air conditioning that want to get home quick, and just everyone's tempers are raised. And then we also asked about extreme vehicles, which is kind of another, electric vehicles, which is another story. But in terms of intersecting with extreme events, people were concerned about blackouts that can last up to 3 days. And so how are you going to get by without your car for 3 days? And I won't go into detail on this, but this was kind of the framework that my student and I came up with at the end. So we see how all of these vulnerabilities kind of cascade on each other. One makes the next even worse. But if we look at what's working with the Resilience Hub, we can kind of think of ascending strengths and how we can integrate that into our public transit systems to increase the resilience of our public transit systems. And then lastly, just the very new work that I have that I wanted to pitch, because I'm very grateful to be on a team with Dr. Karl Kim and Dr. Stephen Wong. This is an NSF Rapid grant looking at emergency response during the LA wildfires. So I just want to thank ITS and RIMI for funding this work, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
We have time for one question. I have many,
Okay.
but let's
Okay.
wait for the panel, okay?
Sounds good.
Right.
Next slide.
Yeah, that'd be great. Our third speaker is Dr. Stephen Wong. He's an assistant professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of Alberta. Heard a lot about you over the past 5 years, so very happy to see you in person and have you here at our event today. So
Thank you.
please welcome.
Thank you.
I just opened.
It takes a second, I think. Yeah. Cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Was flew in yesterday from Canada, so it's been a really good time to be back in California. Some of this research that you'll see today and some of the topics I'll cover, I actually completed while I was at UC Berkeley. So I'm very well attuned with what's going on in the California context. And actually, technically, I was employed by UC Irvine. So it's kind of a mini homecoming, technically. I actually was part of the team that got the RIMI funding. So that was a really great opportunity for us. And I hope for those of you on the RIMI funding, it's been a really great opportunity for all of you. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the integration of resilience research and practice. And so I think this is actually a nice transition as we kind of keep moving. Karl gave a great kind of opening on what hazards we care about. Elisa gave a really great example of community-based resilience. And now I'm going to try to do a little bit more of a high-level overview of some of the work that is both ongoing, but also some of the results that we have and where this kind of leads to as it relates to practice. So I wanted to mention a village of support in this work. So first, of course, a lot of the work done at UC Berkeley and the organizations there, as well as ITS, of course, across the UC system. I'm now at the University of Alberta, and I lead the Resilient and Sustainable Mobility and Evacuation Group, also known as RESUME. So a huge shout out to my incredible grad students who are doing a lot of this great work and who have kind of come along with me on this ride and trying to understand resilient transportation research and make it applicable and useful. So the question I kind of want to pose to everyone and to think about, we often sit in our ivory towers or academia and we think, oh, this is a really great method. This is really helpful for us and we're going to get it published. But I kind of wanted to shift our thinking a little bit in how can the research specifically be used for practical application. So let's think about what the problem is maybe first instead of a very fancy method, and let's try to attack it with the right type of method and the right type of data that is useful for us. And there's a lot of opportunities for research in this context. So I'm going to bring up 5 ones, and I have 5 very quick case studies I wanted to present and some of the work that we're doing. The first one is risk identification, and Karl came up, mentioned a little bit of this as it comes to the detection of hazards. But from a transportation system, it is a risk identification of our infrastructure. What infrastructure is vulnerable to different types of hazards and how so. The second one is behavioral understanding, which is where a lot of my research came into play, trying to make sure that we understand how people are going to react in these types of events. Not just the people evacuating and individuals, but also organizations, or even how a decision maker is going to make a choice and really push out a certain type of response in these types of events. Next are generalizable evacuation patterns. Oftentimes in our research, we have case studies. So the Lahaina fires, for example, the LA wildfires, these aren't necessarily things that are happening every single day and we can capture data on it, unlike typical transportation, where if you wanted a mode choice survey, you can send that out at any point in time, technically, as long as it's not around the holidays. So overall, it's pretty easy, but it's a lot harder for these types of events that are more case study. So we need generalizable evacuation patterns and to understand that to build better plans. Next are a little bit more the fine gritty. What are the responses that we need? What are the strategies that we need in order to make an impact, especially as it relates to evacuations, but also on that recovery side? And finally, I wanted to mention just emerging technologies as well as societal changes that we're all facing. Karl again mentioned a lot of that technology moving forward and how we might be able to either leverage it or it could be a risk to us and trying to utilize it during a different type of event. So I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. Each one of these is a whole kind of grant behind it or a whole project behind it. And I only have 2 slides for each one. So it's very quick. But I wanted to give everyone a little bit of a taste of what is feasible, what's possible for us from a research perspective, and how to make it applicable into the practice. So the first one is we're doing a LiDAR assessment of roadways. And you can see on this map over here, we have, this is aerial LiDAR data that came from BC and Williams Lake. This is in a high fire prone area. And each one of these blue things, as you can kind of see through here, is any type of vegetation that exceeds 5 meters. And this is extracted from this aerial LiDAR data. It's open source. It's relatively easy to use. And what we're interested in this is we're trying to identify what risks are to specific roadways and specifically how it could inhibit an evacuation. So you can think of vegetation as being a critical one. You don't necessarily want fire on your evacuation route. But at the same time is that if you have certain types of vegetation that are overhanging the roadway, it can cause blockages if that vegetation falls on the roadway. Same thing goes with, for example, power lines, but then there's also elements that we're a little bit more used to in transportation, bottlenecks and making sure that vehicles can get through. So we're looking at narrow road widths or parked vehicles that might be in the way, or maybe an opportunity to move those parked vehicles in the event of evacuation. So one reason we're also doing this is that we have done this, but we did it by hand. Let me tell you, that was hard. So a huge shout out to Ian Martin and Jeremy Halpern, who were with me on this project. And this is in Kensington, California, so right outside Berkeley. Literally mapped every single road and went with a measuring wheel to every single road to measure the width. And for every single parked vehicle on the roadway, and this was at 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. because that's when you had the most parked vehicles. So that was part of it. But hopefully this LiDAR work could help automate this process, but also verify that this type of surveying is valuable in certain cases, but in other cases, we can just use a little bit more of an automated way to identify these challenging locations. The second one is this data integration to simulations. So this is where behavioral understanding is really helpful. So we collected data for about 2,800 Albertans and British Columbians on their intended evacuation choices. And through an agent-based model that was developed at the University of British Columbia, we were able to assign these different types of behaviors that came directly from the survey into the simulation. Simulations are notorious for making a million assumptions, right? But our goal was to provide behaviors that would make it a little bit more realistic, that would actually be useful in the simulation, and a closer inspection of different types of bottlenecks. So as a really quick example, this is done in MatSim, which some of you might know about as a transportation open source software. And you can start to see the little agents populate, and this is based on the behavioral data, where they're populating and when they are. Specifically, when is a really key element because it's a departure time question. In this case, everyone has to evacuate north, and you can start to see the red ones are the ones that are stopping and having problems getting through different types of intersections. But I think the key is that these simulations are not new, but the addition of behavioral data is something that we have not done a very good job in the evacuation space. Okay? And this can lead to some very standard transportation metrics and things that we can try to improve from an infrastructure standpoint. We can get maps on which intersections, which routes are going to see problems when it comes to congestion. And we can even get an overall flow to capacity ratio that exists across the entire space of the evacuation. As you can see, that flow to capacity ratio is pretty bad in that beginning part, but really tapers out quite quickly. And so you might think about phasing in this type of situation to reduce that congestion. The third case is looking at generalizable evacuation patterns. Now, what we did here is we were interested in reconstructing two wildfires that occurred up in Alberta. First, the Alberta 2023 wildfires, which actually occurred across multiple communities, and the 2024 Jasper Complex wildfire. We were very fortunate to get free data, which is very rare, but we got it. And this was data that came from TELUS, which is a telecoms company in Canada. And it was de-identified aggregated network mobility data, basically cell phones. But what was nice about it is that it was aggregated, really easy to use, very easy API. An undergrad student could look into it, which is really great, very useful, very simple tool. And we were able to identify key behavioral patterns that occurred before, during, and after wildfires. We could calculate evacuation time estimates, which we have a tough time calculating. And we could get these normalized evacuation curves for each one of these 4 communities. So you can see that this is the percentage of the people that have left that community in that evacuation. So you can see starting out, we are at 0 because no one's evacuated. And then over time, we see people go to a 100% evacuation rate. But some communities evacuate quicker than others. But overall, they have a pretty similar shape, generally, overall. There's a long tail for Rainbow Lake, very rural community. Also, it's surrounded by indigenous reserves up there. And so there was a hesitancy at the time to evacuate. And we can see this steep curve, but this long tail. But what's nice is that you can actually start to create distribution functions. And these distribution functions then feed back into that simulation model I showed you before. So what's really useful with this is that we can get a more generalizable way. We found this log normal cumulative distribution that we know and from a statistical background matches it pretty well, as close as we can possibly get to describing this on a more generalizable standpoint. We found evacuation time estimates about 6 to 10 hours. but reentry was much longer. And this kind of speaks to Karl's point on recovery. And this does have application currently for autocentric smaller cities, but we hope that this expands over time. The fourth case was some of the work I did here in California, a lot of my dissertation work, where we collected a lot of post-disaster data. And this was from a number of wildfires. We have, as well as the 2023 Alberta wildfires, which is ongoing. And Elisa mentioned the LA fires, which is also kind of in the future as of right now. We used a lot of different methods to analyze the data, descriptive statistics, some choice modeling in there. But the key is it shows what people actually did. And that's the key benefit here. And from this modeling results, we're able to get a few key things. So this is a very summarized, I guess, example of, 5 papers. But one interesting thing that came out of this is that mandatory evacuation orders increase evacuating behavior. We've known this for decades. But what was really interesting is that it was more so for evacuation reluctant individuals. So we need to identify who those evacuation reluctant individuals are and provide a little bit more of context and perhaps hopefully encourage them to evacuate. And those people ended up being people who thought that their risk was very low to them. So we need to strengthen these order language. Previous evacuees were more likely to be reluctant. And then finally, lower income individuals were also more likely to be reluctant. And so what this can help us do is help us target who really needs, one, that assistance, but then also who needs to see these orders in a much clearer way. From a more transportation standpoint, we found that context really does matter but only for certain transportation choices. What I mean by context is we found that the different variables that influence departure time included pressure from neighbors, if there was good visibility around, as well as high visual fire level. So if I'm seeing the fire right in front of me, I'm gonna leave. And that's gonna be a key risk indicator. That's not surprising. But what was also interesting is that pressure from neighbors, and that if I'm seeing other people leave, I actually am also induced to leave. And our research was able to empirically capture that. I think that's really valuable. We kind of know this anecdotally to some degree, but it was really great to get that little bit more of that empirical evidence to it. From a route standpoint, unsurprisingly, people wanted low distance routes, not surprising. And they didn't want fire on the route, also not surprising. But this does still tell us that we need to be setting quick, low danger evacuation routes with the proper resources in order to ensure that people feel safe as they move along those routes. My fifth case is divided very quickly into 2, and then I'll wrap up. First is electric vehicles and disasters. We were interested in understanding people's charging actions and how that might affect a future wildfire evacuation. And this helped us identify charging needs as well as electricity demand. So this is a very early result that came out from an agent-based model that we did with 340 EVs in a city in Alberta. And you can see this massive spike in electricity demand because everyone is rushing to charge their vehicle. What was also interesting, there was this massive long tail. This keeps on going. And that long tail is from people charging at home, because home chargers are not very fast. They're very slow. So we're very concerned about that group of people. But the key that we end up noting is that people tend to be actually quite spatially diverse. People will go to their nearest charger or the fastest charger, or some would charge at home, some would charge on the route. It was like a very mixed. I thought everyone was just going to charge at home and call it a day. But that was not the case. And so this tells us we need a little bit more of a multi-pronged strategy. And finally, as our kind of final case, is looking at new resilient roadways and cities. And this has become a key challenge because we continue to build and live in high-risk areas. Not saying we shouldn't necessarily live in those places. They are beautiful. California being a great example of that. It's absolutely gorgeous. But we need to think about how we design our roadways to be more resilient. And we also have to, at the same time, be very thoughtful that these resilient roadways also meet other transportation goals like complete street design. And that's going to be the very difficult thing to do. But there is options. There's co-benefits as well as tensions, ways to do alternative designs or flexible infrastructure. And so we're working on trying to think about how land use and these roadway designs better connect with each other in retrofitting communities. So what does this all have to say to practice? So as you can see, most of this is very applied already. But I wanted to kind of land the plane here and show why we care about this from a practice standpoint. Right now in California, as well as across the United States, we are seeing a massive increase in resilience planning and community protection plans all over the place, okay? A lot of these are also specifically wildfire plans that are meant to reduce risk for wildfires. And so these plans are happening now, but there's not really as much of a transportation element as really involved in them. And so this is where our research can be really impactful. Next are evacuation assessments and evaluations. I've actually been a part of several of these evaluations and assessments in California for 3 different counties, another jurisdiction, and a few other specific developments. I think it's 7 or 8 now at this point. And they really need the research to come through, and they need it to help them in their modeling approaches, as well as what strategies they recommend to communities. It's also thinking about community design and land use moving forward. How do we build in fire risk prone areas or other types of hazards? And finally, that physical protection and the design of vulnerable infrastructure. So all of these different elements can be directly improved from our research. And this is where that practical application kind of comes through. So in a nutshell, that's really all I have. I only had 12 minutes to hopefully to really bring it all together. There's a lot more in the back end. I'd be happy to talk more about my experience with bringing that research to practice. But I wanted to give a quick shout out to all the different research funders of this research, both in the United States as well as in Canada, and particularly NSERC, which has provided a lot of funds for this resilience-minded research to bring it to practice. So with that, I'll end there, and thank you so much.
Questions? I'll take the first one. You mentioned that you did some surveying work to inform the simulations. So what type of behavioral data were you trying to collect, or what behavioral questions were you asking?
So a lot of those behavioral questions are from an evacuation standpoint. So the key ones especially are when people decide to leave, or quote unquote their preparation time. So we ask people, how long will it take you to prepare your household to evacuate? And that's a really key number, because what happens is that there's a good number of people who spend 2+ hours preparing, and that leads to a lot of those long tails. But that's what the behavior is likely going to be, unless it's literally at their doorstep, and then that creates a whole separate kind of issue. We also ask about their destination, what type of shelter they use, what their mode is going to be, and we ask a whole host of risk perception questions as well to get kind of at this. So yeah, a huge battery of questions to help inform that. Yeah,
That's awesome.
I did have a question about like reluctance to evacuate.
Yeah.
As it pertains to 2 different like household characteristics. One is maybe you have a family member who has like Alzheimer's or some other mental impairment. And are those people more or less likely to evacuate, as well as say a disaster happens while like the primary caretakers are away, like at work or something?
Yeah.
Or how likely are they to either call police or firemen, I'm assuming, to say my family member can't evacuate on their own, they need assistance, versus like, I feel like some people would be uncomfortable and they want to go help their family member directly, right? And does that cause problems for like people going in when they should be leaving? And same thing kind of with pets, but like to a different degree, you know?
Yeah. People tend to want to evacuate with their household. That tends to be a very common kind of step. So you'll see if it happens during the day, a lot of people go to schools to pick up their children, as an example. Even if the school has their own like plans and everything, they'll like make that attempt to go pick people up. For your specific question, I would have to double check on the exact, because we didn't differentiate mental disability with physical disability. We just had individuals with disabilities. So I'll go back and check specifically, but we were able to also identify just within the group of individuals with disabilities if they had intersecting vulnerabilities and how that intersecting vulnerability influenced different types of either reluctance or other types of questions. So I can bring that up in more specific results, and I can let you know on that, but we do have it. So yes,
Thank you.
great question.
Well, thank you very much.
Stephen, this is Karl. Could you say a little bit, it's great to see you. Could you say a little bit more about the reluctant evacuees who had evacuated before?
Yes, that one's an interesting one. Our thinking is those individuals had evacuated, but at the time their evacuation was not particularly bad. So what happened was they might have evacuated from a fire, but that fire was not a really bad fire, or there was no major destruction of homes, or it ended up being a little bit, not necessarily a false alarm, but it just wasn't as impactful as they thought it would be. So as a result, the next time around, they're like, I'm going to be more reluctant kind of on the next time around for that different type of event. I can handle this. So I think it was when people evacuate and something isn't necessarily as bad as they thought it was going to be, it reduces their risk perception of that event. That was our theory behind that reluctance.
Yeah, but with these repeat events, this is a very, very interesting finding too.
Yeah, and we actually found that interesting with hurricanes too.
Yeah.
So that one actually held between hurricanes and wildfires, which was interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect, thank you.
Nice.
Okay, I'm going to introduce our fourth speaker, who is Chief Chuck Tobias. He's Assistant Fire Chief in the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. Please join me in welcoming him. Before we get going, I'm going to ask my assistant, Senator Bach, to hand out some papers and pens. I'd like you all to write down at least one question you have for the panel, which I will use to help moderate the session once you're done. Jerry, thank you. Yeah.
While you're setting that up, I'll go ahead and jump in a little bit. I'll tell you a little bit about myself once the slide comes up, but it's a pleasure to be here, first off. You'll find that I'm going to be a lot different than the other speakers in regards to the fact that I'm not necessarily doing the data. I collect data on a regular basis, and I base a lot of emergency decisions based, upon that with the information out there. So a lot of great questions out there. I have a lot of responses for those questions that you might find useful. You're not going to find the empirical data and research to support a lot of those things, but I can tell you they're pretty accurate. And so, having said that, we'll get back to some of those questions, toward the end. So, not knowing exactly what we were going to be covering for this conference, I kind of put together just a very short little PowerPoint just to keep my mind on track in regards to certain things to talk about. I can certainly be flexible enough to switch gears and go in a different direction based upon the other discussions that have already taken place, because primarily, having lived it for 44 years, I have a lot of background knowledge that actually reinforces some of the things that we're talking about, and some that may challenge some of those questions as well that may stimulate further research. And so, having said that, I'm Chuck Tobias. I've been in the fire service for approaching 44 years now. I started out in the city of Fresno as a firefighter for 36 years. I promoted into the rank of chief officer. I was the chief officer there for the good portion of my career there. Responded to a lot of different emergencies, not just within the local jurisdiction where I worked, but I responded out for other disasters throughout the state of California on a regular basis. Subsequently, when I retired, I was recruited to work for the state of California to build a hazardous materials response program for the state. I've done that, and I still manage that program, but on top of that, I respond all over the place for all kinds of different disasters and emergencies as a subject matter expert in those areas. And I've been with them now for about 7.5 years. A lot of people look at me as a subject matter expert on hazardous materials and terrorism response, because that's an area that I focused on a lot. And I spent a lot of time working on a national level in Washington, D.C. and other places, building the programs and response capabilities that we see at a national level now. But I also spent a lot of time dealing with all the other disasters that are out there as well. So I have kind of a wide verse background in regards to emergency response. So what I put together for you today was just to talk about the different types of modes of transportation for hazardous materials that exist out there. And I'm not going to focus a lot on a lot of this, but we will talk a little bit about some of the road transportation, which seems to tie in a lot with the other speakers that have been here today. But there's other modes of transportation for hazardous materials as well. So rail is a big one in the state of California. Pipelines, which we won't focus on much because it's not going to be impactful for those of you that are not dealing directly with that. And then air and maritime related issues as well. So I'm going to talk real briefly about a couple of these different scenarios, not necessarily a case study, but just to give you some overview of some of the things that occurred. So back in September in 2019, I responded out to support Highway 50 going into Lake Tahoe from the Sacramento Basin area. And we had a motor vehicle accident that occurred over a bridge that crossed the Truckee River going into Lake Tahoe. And subsequently, we had some fatalities along with that accident. But the big impact for us was the large tractor trailer rig that was carrying gasoline fuel that erupted into fire right on top of the bridge. And so from civil engineering impact, which is not mostly the people in this room, there were some significant issues in regards to the stability of the bridge and what was going on with that. For us, from a hazmat standpoint, we had hydrocarbons, gasoline that was now going into the Truckee River, which is going to have to feed Lake Tahoe. And so we had some major concerns with that. And I had some command and control issues as well in regards to the different agencies that were supposed to take responsibility for their jurisdictions that failed to do so. And so from my standpoint, as the state representative, I'm trying to bring all those people back together to the table so they have a proper outcome. So that was a significant event. I can answer questions on that event down the road. Most recently in 2024, we had I should back up and say we have been experiencing a lot of lithium-ion battery-related issues in the state of California the last couple of years. Some of those you probably have read about or done some social media research on, but they've become a major problem for everyone, really, internationally, nationally, and here in the state of California. One of the most recent ones in 2024, we had an incident that occurred on I-15 northbound, coming from both down the southern part of the state into the Las Vegas area. Lithium-ion battery overturned as it was getting coming back onto or going off of Highway 15. It caught fire, which they tend to do when they go into thermal runaway, and it shut down Highway 15 for over 48 hours. Concerns in regards to that, as were mentioned by some of the other speakers, especially Dr. Kim, were that we had vehicles that were stranded on the roadway that couldn't go either direction for extended periods of time and up to 48 hours in the latter part of the summer, with the degrees at 109 degrees plus in some of those areas during the daytime. And so we had issues in regards to keeping people hydrated, keeping people medically safe, getting the roadway somewhat cleared, or trying to get resources to those individuals that were stranded, people running out of fuel, air conditioning units going out because the cars wouldn't idle for very long. So we had a lot of cascading events based on that issue. And that was one of our first opportunities to deal with a large scale closure of a major thoroughfare for an extended period due to lithium-ion batteries. Subsequently, we've had a number of other ones that have occurred since then. So we shut down I-80 2 months later. More recently in September of same year, 2024, we shut down the Vincent Thomas Bridge and a good portion of the Port of Los Angeles because of the same issue, lithium-ion battery top heavy rolled over getting onto the bridge, and it shut down that thoroughfare for 48 hours. The major impacts to us that we look at from that not only are the public safety standpoints, but the economic impacts that occur as well, because both of those incidents cost in the upwards of millions to close to $1 billion for the port. And so those create significant issues for us in major events. And since lithium-ion batteries are still fairly new, and the research on them is still ongoing, there are not a lot of good avenues for data that tells you exactly how you're supposed to address those issues. You've come a long ways in a short period of time in doing so, but we still have a long ways to go in regards to addressing that. I challenge you as students and researchers down the road, this would be an ideal area to start looking at gathering information and data for the future, because these impacts are not going to go away, and they're going to get worse as we start looking at hydrogen and other alternative fuels for vehicles down the road. And so as I look beyond what we've already had occur on bridges, I look at tunnels and subways and other areas that can have significant issues due to high heat that comes off of these types of fires, the fact that they do not go out very readily, and we do not have enough water in a lot of cases to extinguish these fires, and what kind of impacts that will have to the infrastructure that they're either in or on top of down the road. More recently, also 2024, we had a major battery energy storage fire occurred down in Southern California. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's a rural area down in Otay Mesa. But because of that fire, they have over 1 million batteries that have been damaged that are going to need to be transported. And now they're going to be transported and have already started transporting them using the freeway systems to go to Nevada. They're also going up the I-15. And these batteries still have storage of energy inside of them. So there's a high potential that already damaged batteries can go into thermal runaway and fire again. So the potential for additional events, shutting down freeways for extended periods is out there just based on the fact that we're transporting those batteries from one location to an area where they could be properly recycled. And we just had most recently the largest battery fire in the world occur in Moss Landing over in the Monterey County area. That fire is going to have some significant issues as well in regards to the disposal of those batteries. And those are going to have to also be transported unless they can come up with a plan to shred those batteries on site. They'll be going to Nevada as well, since there's very few places that recycle lithium-ion batteries. And so the roadways used to bring those from Monterey to Nevada are going to be much more significant than the rural roadways of I-15 or areas that they're transporting from Southern California to get that location. So those are kind of some of the things that I brought up for you to consider or to think about as you start doing research, because this is a brand new area that we're going to be addressing, and it does pose significant problems in regards to transportation-related emergencies that we're going to be addressing in the near future. And then on top of that, as Dr. Kim spoke about, hydrogen brings with it its own significant events, and the fact that, and also concerns for people like me, because highly flammable and in some cases explosive. And so you can imagine that an impact of a vehicle with hydrogen as the fuel source doesn't give people inside that vehicle much time to escape. And it also poses a significant damage to the potential infrastructure and things around it as it goes into fire or explosion. So those are things to consider down the road. Having said that, and listening to the other speakers, there are a lot of other topics that we can expand on based upon this. And so I was taking some notes for that as the other speakers spoke, and I've got a couple comments to stimulate discussions for you and questions that you may have now for the other speakers in regards to that. So when Dr. Kim was talking, he had addressed and made mention, as did other speakers, of cascading effects. Cascading effects are major things that we need to be considering, especially when we talk about transportation and things of that nature. And I'll bring up the potential for earthquakes in Southern California and in Northern California, and the potential infrastructure damage that comes with earthquakes. Along with that, the damage to other facilities that can pose threats and hazards to transportation routes. So if we have an earthquake that occurs, then we have impacts to chemical facilities. Now we have plumes of chemicals that are obstructing normal access or egress routes for transportation that most people wouldn't consider because they're focused on other things and the earthquake and the structural damage and things that occurred with it. But we have all these other cascading effects that have the potential to cause a lot of cascading issues, as a matter of fact, in regards to those that need to be considered. We talked about the evacuation concerns, and we've had both Dr. Kim and Dr. Wong talk a little bit about evacuation concerns. And so when I think about evacuation concerns and some of the major hazards, I think back on 2018's Camp Fire that occurred in Northern California up in Paradise and Concord and Mount Gaia. And the fact that they only have one way in, one way out. And once those are obstructed because of abandoned vehicles that are running out of fuel, and there's no longer a mechanism for those individuals to have an evacuation or to use their normal mode of transportation for evacuation, they got out and they started running for their lives. And unfortunately, very many of them didn't make it out and burned either in their vehicles or on the side of the road. And so those are some of the issues that need to be considered when you're looking at evacuation routes down the road, is that we have a lot of narrow roads out there in a lot of different communities, and there's only one way in and there's only one way out. When we talk about weather hazards that are out there, I look at the recent storms that occurred, and I'm thinking about Mammoth Mountain. We had a number of different factors that occurred with the recent storms, and I'll be one of the first to say we are experiencing climate change. Whether some people will acknowledge that or not, it is occurring around us on a regular basis. So the storms are getting much worse in some cases. And when we looked at the storms that occurred back in 2020, late 23 and early 24, we had the amount of snow that that we never seen in the state of California in some areas where we normally don't even see snow. And because of that, we had trees down, lines down, all kinds of evacuation issues that occurred, and no way to get to those obstructed areas because of the snow melt that had impacted the roadways as well. So those are some of the things that can bring about concerns. And you're gonna have to watch me on time, like, you know, because like I mentioned in my email, I can go on for a whole day on these topics. When we look at the most recent fires in Los Angeles, so Palisades and Eaton were the ones that impacted populations, but there were 7 major fires that all occurred during the same time due to the high wind, hurricane force winds that were occurring, as well as the drought conditions that had occurred, giving minimal time for people to react. And so once again, a lot of those areas had one way in, one way out, and the evacuations didn't give them a lot of time to prepare. And so people were leaving in whatever they were wearing, and in some cases trying to get out the streets, which were now blocked by abandoned vehicles, and they had to leave on foot. Some of the issues we had with both Palisades and Eaton were the fact that there are people out there with disabilities that are living in homes, and there was no way to get to those people, and they were left waiting for rides to hopefully evacuate them, and some made it out and some did not because of that. But people do have a tendency to want to go back, as you had mentioned, for their pets. Even if they're working and the evacuation is already set, law enforcement can set up perimeters and block roadways and allow people in and one-way traffic out, but no one comes back in. But trust me, the people that live in those areas know all the back routes, and they can get in, you know, if they're that determined to, and they did. And they will go back for their pets, and they will go back for family members that are disabled to try to get them out, because they would rather do that than perish. And as mentioned, there are issues in regards to past events where impacts did not play out the way that people thought, and so they didn't have the damage that they were expecting, but they evacuated, and they tend not to want to leave on the next go round, and that is real, and it happens all the time. And we deal with on the fire service because it's a jeopardy or an impact to us as firefighters, because now we have to place firefighters in danger to either protect them or to go back in and get them into areas where we probably shouldn't have our people working either. And so those are real things that do occur out there. And as Chief Wong and Dr. Wong had mentioned, if people see neighbors, that are leaving, they're going to want to leave. On the backside, if people see neighbors that are not leaving, they tend to want to stay. So it works both ways. And so depending on the past incidents that have occurred and the outcomes that they faced, it really determines the way that they're going to react the next time. And a lot of those people will wait until the last minute, until the fire's on their doorstep, or the emergency is right in front of them before they choose to leave. And a lot of times that's too late. They can't get out. And if they have livestock along with them and they haven't planned for that, then they're in a world of hurt. We're going to lose a lot of other living beings because of it. So there's a lot of different areas that we can go in. And trust me, I have a ton of other notes that I could chat about because I've been involved in most of these fires that they're talking about at one level or another, either boots on the ground, managing the firefighting resources, or supporting those incidents. And so, having said that, I know that I've got to be close on time. So I'm going to wrap up, and it's going to be back to our moderator.
Thank you very much. You did good on time compared to academics who always go over. So thank you. Do we have any questions for Chief Boss?
I have a very quick question. Do you think that we are underestimating the risk of hazardous materials in general? Like
Yes.
as a society, and also from like an evacuation? Like do you think that we are underestimating it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily the correct word is underestimating. I think that technology and we'll just take one for example. The fact that we want to go green, especially here in California, we are moving forward at really quick paces to get things done. And so putting lithium-ion batteries out there without doing the research to find out the impacts of those lithium-ion batteries and what they're going to do to the individuals that are using them, the proper disposal of those batteries when things go bad. We're moving quicker than technology is keeping up for us to build the resources to actually combat those, as well as when Dr. Kim talked about hydrogen. We're moving quick on getting hydrogen out there. In fact, there's vehicles that are supplied by hydrogen out there right now. And we haven't done the research to find out what the impacts are going to be. It burns clean, and I'll give them that. But what are the other impacts of these alternative fuels that are out there on the public? And I have concerns about that because I'm in public safety. That's where my focus is saving lives. And so sometimes I think we outgrow or we move too fast. So it's not necessarily the fact that we're underestimating it. It's more the fact that we're moving quicker than we can keep up with maintaining the infrastructure to support it.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, I'm going to invite the panelists to come to the panelist table then, please. I'm going to collect these yellow sheets. I never gave you a yellow paper. You get the chance.
On vacation.
I do.
Let's just say it's also. And also.
And I'd like to invite students, if you'd like to come up. Even if you want to come facilitate a discussion.
Thank you. Were you sitting here?
I'm taking this one.
Oh,
That's. This was not to get you to not participate, in the sense that if you want to join the conversation, please do. Just wanted to have some kind of back questions here. All right, and of course, panelists, please converse with each other. Dr. Kim, you're behind the panelists. We'll definitely make sure that you're involved here. Okay, so I have kind of broad question, particularly to Chief Tobias, but others, please feel free to chime in as well. Easy question, hard answer probably. Is there any low-hanging fruit, do you think, in the area of improving safety for communities, whether it's in terms of better preparation for disaster, improving the efficiency of evacuations? From your perspective, your experience, what's the low-hanging fruit that's out there, if there is any? Thank you.
Really, there's legislative bills that are out there right now that are going to hopefully help us in this. But some of the low-hanging fruit I think that's out there, and I look at this from both the weather and wildfires that we haven't maintained our forests and vegetation very well in the past. There are mechanisms and things that we can do off season where we can address those issues, but they've been neglected for very, very, very long. And because of that, we have overgrowth in a lot of areas there that causes fires to burn faster, fires to burn hotter. And communities that have built into those areas now because they love the view and they like the atmosphere and living like that, have now placed themselves in dangerous areas where they shouldn't, or they probably could have considered a little bit more of the hazard before they actually built in those locations. So I think some of the low-hanging fruit that we could do is trying to clean that up a little bit. From a weather standpoint, same thing. The overgrowth vehicles like that not only cause ladder fuels that get up into the trees, but it also causes trees that are damaged and they want to fall down. You get winds or other things. So heavy snow melt and things of that nature cause trees to come down. Once again, another impact to transportation because you get too many trees down. It takes a while to get those off the roadways, and that means people cannot evacuate.
Sounds great. Other comments from the panelists?
I mean, I think low-hanging fruit's tough because I feel like anything that we do in the resilient transportation field is never necessarily low-hanging because there's a lot of kind of steps to move through. I do think that there is just a need for just evacuation planning straight up because a lot of communities don't have it. They just don't have it, or it's part of a response plan, which is very beneficial for decision makers. But there's not necessarily that from a public facing standpoint. The public doesn't necessarily know how to react in certain different types of cases. And so I think that type of evacuation planning can be really good. There's also the element of, and this is coming through CEQA, actually, a lot of litigations come out that are now requiring developments to actually have evacuation analyses. And there's been plenty of lawsuits coming through saying, well, you didn't do an evacuation analysis, you can't build your development now. And so if it's a more regular part of CEQA and kind of how like a 2,000 unit development comes through, and if it's on that higher fire risk area, that they're constantly doing that as like kind of a step. And then the third kind of small thing, it's not small, but we could consider it is, I think we just have to be a little creative on how we design our infrastructure. Not every hazard is going to work like this. It depends on the different type of hazard, but sometimes this very small change in design or a small increase of cost can actually yield a lot of benefit. But we don't necessarily make that case very well. An example I like to think about is if you have a roadway with a decent wide shoulder, which a lot of new roadways have to have a decently wide shoulder for emergencies, why don't you just widen the shoulder by like 1 more foot, and maybe you can get vehicles down it. So I mean, it's going to cost something for sure, and it could be, you know, a lot in some cases, especially bridges, but it might be worth it. It might be worth at the time to use that as evacuation route. It could also be more safe for firefighting or police if they're off the side. So there's other co-benefits. So I think we have to do a better job at describing co-benefits.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think that it's really important, because I think that what Dr. Wong has mentioned is critically important. People tend to drive home or to their location using they go one way every time. The area that's comfortable for them, and if they have to stray off of that for any reason at all, they tend not to make it, or they get lost. It puts them outside their comfort zone. So as we build those additional roadways in and out of infrastructure, or we do the planning for that, we have to take that into account, because the majority of the people are going to be evacuating on utilizing the same route, which overloads the amount of cars, and the fact that people don't keep half a tank of fuel or better in their tanks, and they're running on empty when they get home, thinking, well, I'll just go to the gas station in the morning. They tend to run out of gas, and now we've got roadways that are completely obstructed and no tow vehicles in movement. We end up using bulldozers to have to get them out of the way, which is way after the fact.
Thank you. Dr. Kim, I think you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that one of the low-hanging fruit that we could focus on, I think, is paratransit, persons with disabilities, people with limited mobility, people who have a difficult time moving around even before the events occur. And I think if we do that, we can really reduce a lot of the harm that can occur. And we have data, and we have, you know, through the ADA and the paratransit, there are lots of complexities associated with getting this type of data, and then also ensuring that, you know, that their anonymity is protected, and other types of concerns, because you know, and I think it's related to the community-based strategies. We've been working a lot on resilience hubs as well too, and I think there's a link between not just the government services or paratransit operations, but the volunteer sector that can help to ensure and evacuate as well too. One of the things that we've been trying to study in Lahaina is the emergence of these spontaneous resilience hubs. It's one thing if you have a hardened, pre-planned location that you've set aside resources and assets and ensured that there's roadway connectivity to it, you know, that's part of it. But what was really fascinating was the emergence of these community-based, and in Hawaii, a lot of it actually had to do who had access through the water, another form of transport as well too. So the canoe clubs, those that had access were able to reach places that were otherwise stranded and needed supplies, equipment, personnel as well too. And the point that I'm trying to make too is a lot of this stuff came in before the formal response occurred. And so if we can strengthen that, I think that would be a good thing too.
That's great. I'm going to jump off of that. I think there's a lot of interest from the audience from the questions here in regards to this role that the informal networks play. Steve already mentioned in terms of one neighbor responding to another neighbor. So I have specific questions here, but I just want to dig a little bit deeper. Are there more insights that you have the whole panel it is. Some of the questions that I do have here are, if we are getting these clusters of people moving at the same time, does that overly stress the transportation system in terms of congestion? Another question I have is in terms of, can we identify these maybe informal leaders of communities that can communicate either directly or indirectly with their neighbors and saying, hey, I'm leaving, I'm getting out of here. I recognize that this is a real threat. I'm not saying you need to follow me, but just getting the word out that I'm leaving. I would say if your neighbor is visibly leaving, that's great, but maybe you're on social media as well. And people you follow or people in the community are leaving. Is there any potential there to increase behavior in terms of proper evacuation?
I guess, okay, since I didn't answer the last one, I'll tie in what I was gonna say for the last one. And
Sure.
this one. So one of the low hanging fruit I was thinking of was, so it's not necessarily easy, but it's like relatively less expensive and faster as related to perceptions. So Dr. Wong, you mentioned like, how do we change the wording for certain groups that are reluctant and make that wording stronger for them, but maybe not making it stronger for everyone who might evacuate when they don't really need to. And so I think now is like, we see these like social media algorithms and we see large language models, we see that this tailored messaging tailored to the individual is happening much more regularly and faster and easier. And so I think there's maybe some potential there to explore that kind of custom messaging. And so that kind of ties into what you're asking now in terms of social media. How do we get the message to people that might not, like with my focus groups, might not trust the government that much, might not trust these official warnings, but trust their people on social media or trust their neighbor. So yeah, I think kind of, I don't know, I'm not saying like use the algorithm for that necessarily, but like, yeah, maybe coming up with different messaging for different groups. And I think your idea to target sort of the leaders of different communities. But I think that also comes back to like relationship building. It's like a very long-term strategy, but building that trust back that has been ruptured over a very long period of time is part of that strategy, I think. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I did kind of 2 points to kind of piggyback off of that. In terms of trust of government, it's been eye-opening living in Canada, which tends to have a higher trust in government. The number of people who said, I will go on to a government registry for additional assistance was mind-bogglingly high. Well, if you ask that question here in the United States, they'll be like, no, do not put my information anywhere. So it's very interesting because there's a different trust of government. There's this idea that government is are they there to help or not? And so that I kind of want to mention that. The other thing in terms of informal networks is that some of my research and some of your research as well has looked at how I might be able to encourage people to share their resources with others. In this case, transportation resources or sheltering resources. Turns out people are actually relatively willing to share, especially transportation, especially over a short period of time. So we can try to match people with rides, and this can be a way to supplement, but not supplant public resources like public transit, paratransit, like those still need to happen. But the share economy can actually be a really useful tool. And a lot of it's going to have to be on a neighbor to neighbor basis. And it's going to have to be kind of acquaintances or within existing social networks to make it happen. We found that communities that have higher trust of each other and higher trust and compassion, so social capital variables, are more willing to share their resources with other people. And so that does create opportunity, but also if your community is not very trusting of each other, could create a lot of problems alongside of it. So we can even see this, it can be in either urban or rural locations can have different trust levels. But I thought that was a really interesting research outcome in terms of that informal network and the opportunities there.
Yeah, I'll jump in also. One of the comments or part of the question was in regards to volunteerism, and just want to throw it out there so everybody's aware of it. Dr. Kim kind of spoke on it. The impacts to FEMA were still up in the air, but pretty substantial. And the reduction of AmeriCorps and a lot of the volunteer program funding has already occurred. And so a lot of the resources that communities used to count on to provide support and services will no longer be there. There's no funding. So it's going to create further issues. Those jurisdictions being able to function in a disaster.
Okay, this question is for, I think, directed towards Dr. Kim, but I think Stephen, you can also chime in as well. It's in regards to the technologies that you highlighted in your presentation, particularly LiDAR and Google Maps. So the question is about how the data information that's coming from those sensors is being processed into valuable information, and then also how that valuable information is being used to both short-term, medium-term, long-term improve strategies for preparedness and response to disasters.
Yeah, I think we're flying the plane as we're building it. And every time we turn around, there is a new tool, new platform, new algorithm. And part of this is kind of sorting through and filtering this stuff, because there's a tremendous investment in the equipment, in the software, and then the other thing that's not counted in this is all the training and the capacity building that we need to do with this. And so we can do a lot, in our labs, right? With graduate students, with research projects. I'm very concerned about the decrease in funding for scientific research, because it's not just the basic research, but this kind of applied research that many of us do as well too. So I think part of, in the way that I kind of look at it, is that we need not just laboratory that are doing this, but actually test beds in places that we can, and that we use these disasters and these events as field laboratories where we can pull together the data and integrate the plan. We can't, I mean, the United States is a huge country. If we were Singapore, it would be a lot more focused and easier in terms of what the hazard exposure is and what, the capabilities are. But, our country is vast. I mean, even California is vast as well too. And so I think we have to pick and choose the places where we evaluate and test and develop, and then work with the stakeholders. The part of the work that I do that I think has been the most rewarding part of my career has been working with first responders and emergency managers, fire, police, EMS, and the transportation agencies are really involved in the response and recovery of when bad things happen, right? And so I think part of this is, I think as Alicia, this is a long-term prospect, right? We got to build the relationships. We got to connect the science. And unfortunately, so much of it now is being privatized as well too, which I think creates another type of hazard and threat in terms of the control of information, proprietary information, all these NDAs that you have to sign. And, it isn't the kind of friendly ecosystem, I think, for innovation and dissemination that historically universities have played a pretty role on. So I see the assault on university-based research is having very profound impacts in terms of the ability to do the technical work.
What was the question again? Sorry.
Sure. The question was about, you mentioned these LiDAR-based sensors, advanced sensing technologies. How are you using the data that's coming from those sensors, processing it to get valuable information, and then moving from valuable information to actually improving practice or policy maybe?
Yeah, so we're using open LiDAR data, which is nice, and it's aerial, which makes it less accurate. So that is a risk as comparatively to Dr. Kim's work, which is more focused that he's actually going out and collecting it, and it's also ground-based and it's extremely accurate. And so all that data is coming in as just purely points, just like points, because the light lasers are basically sent out and that bounce back and they tell us that there's something there. Problem is that we don't know what actually is there. We know that there's a tree there, but the system and the computer doesn't know that there's a tree there. And so there's a very wide amount of research and processing that has to occur, in which you have to basically segment the point cloud into different key features. That process we're doing, at least in our research group, using existing software, which does a pretty good job overall. Not not necessarily the best, but there's also, I have a colleague of mine who has his own algorithms and his own methodologies and is actually very good at identifying some of these different elements. Just takes time for, as Karl said, about training and making sure that people who are using it know how to do it. But he's able to, they're now able to segment massive amounts of data in a span of less than a minute, which is incredibly fast. And so now then is to take that to people who might want to use it and say, well, what analyses do you want us to run using these different features and whatnot? So in the example of mine, it would be where there are these bottlenecks that are occurring, where these road widths are really decreasing and where there could be a lot of issues when it comes to that. You could also get data at certain periods of time for those parked vehicles. And so that's, I think, where we hope to kind of end up with that data. It's not easy, especially given my background, it's more choice modeling. So I'm more interested in like how people make decisions, less about the LiDAR, but I see value in it. I think that's why we ended up going in that direction, is that is value in these other data sources. We just have to be clear-eyed about what challenge we're trying to solve with it. It's not just to collect data and do something interesting. It's like, there's a reason why we collected it in this way.
We also have a lot of technology in aerial LiDAR as well, and we use it on a regular basis. So when we have disasters, we can go out, and if there's an erosion issue where a road used to be and now a portion of it is gone, or buildings used to be there and now they're gone, it helps us to determine situational awareness on where to focus different resources to address emergency response. But it also helps to determine, where people are going. What are the routes that they're using? What do we need to protect to help them, accomplish their goal of getting out? And so there's a lot of good use that's occurring out there. We've done it on a lot of different disasters. Everything from determining the height of rivers and canals during flooding episodes to mud and debris flow issues during flooding and rain related issues, and we're preparing for earthquake and tsunami related issues in regards to determining what was there that is not there any longer.
Great, thank you for the insights, everyone. Another question here, where was it? Yeah, so it was in regards to this concept of kind of cascading disasters. I think it's to the whole panel here, but I can open up with Professor Borowski. We have one disaster, we're trying to recover from that disaster. We have people that are maybe had baseline vulnerabilities. Maybe now they have even fewer resources to deal with the potential next disaster that's coming. So, how do we think about that conceptually as academics? How do we build better resiliency in our communities, maybe through community hubs, other technologies? And the other main part is like, what does the people in your role, choose Tobias, do to prepare for the second disaster or the third disaster if we do end up having multiple over a short period of time?
Sure. I can start.
Yeah.
I think it sounds kind of like the question I wrote down, so I don't have a good answer. I'm actually mostly curious, but I think just we have to be really careful about how long these recovery periods are taking. Like if we look at Hurricane Katrina and how long it took, like the recovery period, how long that is, and how that's going to overlap with additional hazards, disasters that are likely to occur, and just kind of finding ways, I think, to increase the speed of recovery. I mean, it's, of course, we want to do it as fast as we can, so it's not like no one's thought of that before, but I just think it's becoming even more crucial. And so, yeah, maybe resilience hubs are a way to have more localized efforts at recovery that can maybe speed things up. But yeah, was there another part of that? Okay,
That was,
there's a lot. Okay.
Yeah, that was a tricky question.
Yeah.
Repeat that question because I did have something.
Yeah, so the question is about cascading disasters. One disaster hits, you have people who have kind of a baseline level of vulnerability, but now they may be more vulnerable because some of their resources are taken away. Some of your examples earlier, they have fewer routes to evacuate if we're talking about an evacuation situation. How are you thinking about that? How are we planning for those types of events, those pairs of events, I guess?
Well, that's really an interesting question in that we just experienced that. And so if we look at Southern California and we had those hurricane force winds and drought conditions, and we had a fire that occurred in Palisades, and The fire service had pre-positioned resources out there, knowing that we had weather events that were occurring, so we had a lot of additional resources out there. So when the event occurred in Palisades, those resources were deployed out there from different communities. And then they implemented the Master Mutual Aid program, which brought resources from all over the state to re-engage. And hours later, occurred in Altadena. Well, a lot of the resources were already committed. And so we were dealing just hours later, same day, with scarce resource management protocols, just trying to protect what was occurring there. And then, of course, it was compounded with other fires that didn't impact communities. But still, the amount of resource load that was there was pretty significant. And the fact that we only have limited resources to deal with to begin with, you reach out to other states and you're talking days before those resources can be mobilized and placed into service. So it is significant. And so we can't really plan for cascading event after event after event because we just do not have the resources to address all of them. So it becomes one of those issues now where we have to prioritize where resources go, and it does create hazards. It's impactful.
So if I could follow up then, it makes sense totally what you said about you only have so many resources, you can pre-position them, but once cascading or kind of spatially related events are occurring. In this example you're talking about, was there effective communication, good management of those resources across the potential or the fires that were putting communities at risk? Or was there room for improvement, you think, next time around?
There's always room for improvement, trust me. So we do have the State Operations Center was activated, and so they were prioritizing and looking at the different resources that are out there. So some of that was taking place. The communication between the local governments probably lacked a little bit because they were really focused on their emergency and couldn't really focus too much energy on someone else's emergency. So I think that their ability to communicate very well, even between Los Angeles City and Los Angeles County, who share borders all over the place, I think struggled with being able to maintain good situational awareness and communication modes or lanes to address those issues was probably way challenged. And then I know that you brought up animals. I can say without a doubt that animal services and those response capabilities for those were sorely understaffed and struggled for a very long time. And I'm sure that when things are said and done, they're going to determine that there were probably a lot of animals that perished that possibly could have been salvaged.
Professor Kim?
I think with cascading disasters, the first thing that I think is most important is a mindset. We have to have a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary perspective on cascading events. When an earthquake generates a tsunami or a volcanic eruption can generate a tsunami, which then leads to not just a power failure, but a nuclear disaster. We have the classic case of one event triggering another. And what that requires is that we have scientists and responders and people who deal with hazmat from a variety of different disciplines coming together, working together, sharing information and data and methods and tools. But the problem is that's not how we're taught. We're taught to be very, very specialized and narrow and not to be interdisciplinary in terms of the way our education systems work, the way our professional societies are. It's all very discipline related. And I think that there's two ways that we can get around that. First, I do a lot of work on scenario planning. And so the probable worst case scenario in terms of maximum harm that could occur, right? With all of these events coming together. The second, I think, tactic to this is that if we do it from a place-based perspective, which incorporates not just the threats and the hazards, but the assets, the people, the connections, the community that's there. And that's what's so great about this panel. You know, I think it's great that you have people from a diversity of backgrounds and interests working together. But I think that that's part of the key to how you manage these cascading complex disasters, which are going to increase in intensity and frequency.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're getting close to time. Chief Tobias, though, hinted at something earlier that I'm going to ask him to expand upon, which was that maybe the academics are slightly missing the ball on some of the maybe ideas they presented, research they're focused on. So, you know, I'll allow you to expand on that more. And then the follow-up question, part two, is what can researchers, academics be doing to better inform both what we call the practice you're involved in, but then I think you also mentioned some kind of state level policy, right? We do policy research and we do practice research. So open the floor to you.
Okay, yeah, and I'll start with the second part of your question. So there's legislation out there right now that's both at the Senate and Assembly level here in California that's addressing or trying to address some of the new emerging threats with alternative fuels. Okay. And so lithium-ion batteries, and then also toxic heavy metals. And they're calling together different state agencies to work with academia as well as the public to determine potential impacts that we're not seeing, the data and the research that needs to be done to determine whether we have risks or hazards that have not been addressed yet. And so I know that there's been a lot of discussion on the focus of responder safety and exposure to different chemicals, even in wildfires. There's additional data and research that needs to be done in regards to high heat wildfires and what type of heavy metal type of particulates get up into the air that our firefighters and other responders will, even the communities downwind in the plume. And so those are areas that have not been addressed as of yet. The research has not been done yet. So we've got those bills in place to try to stimulate moving those forward so we get some solid answers in regards to that. In regards to areas that I think that we can improve on and that the research that's being done already can elaborate on and it was addressed, I think, by you in regards to the alert warning systems that are out there. And we don't want to focus on any single failure that has occurred, but there have been failures that have occurred. And I'll just broadly just state that there are times when alert systems should have been used, but when they weren't. There are times when alert systems went out and they went out to way too many people. So people are now congesting the roads that are evacuating that they never needed to evacuate because they didn't streamline where the messaging was supposed to go. And then getting the messaging out to all the people that need it. And so when I look at some of the special needs populations that are out there, there are people out there that if you send out a message in one or two different modes, aren't going to impact or individuals that don't fall within that category are going to be able to get that message. And so there are improvement areas, I think, in regards to what we're already doing right now to try to strengthen that. Some of the other notes that I made down there was that infrastructure risk analysis that's being done out there. And I know that Dr. Kim really hit on something that I really liked, and the fact that we operate in silos really a lot. And so we're focused on that one little area that maybe our study is involved with, and we fail to look outside the box at the other impacts that could be occurring out there. And so we really need to do that. We need to break down those silos and improve those modes of communication so the data that we're collecting is actually considering and bringing in other individuals that may be able to use that data to work on the studies that they're working on as well. And so when we look at infrastructure analysis, and I know that Dr. Wong did a really good presentation on a lot of that infrastructure analysis, there's a lot of additional infrastructure that's out there that needs to be evaluated, needs to be impactful. And we've done some on transportation, and we've done some on utilities, but there's a whole lot of other infrastructure that's out there that we need to get additional information on to find out what the impacts are going to be during a large-scale disaster to other areas of our communities. I don't know if that answers your question.
That definitely did answer my question. Stephen?
Yeah, I think the one area in terms of kind of where the academics can perhaps do a better job in some ways is, especially even as an academic, I'm continuously kind of working on this, is I think we often want to fit everything into a specific method that we're an expert in or a theory that we just subscribe to. And we kind of go down that deep rabbit hole. We're like, we're going to make this method, we're going to change these parameters. It's going to really, I'm going to make this tweak. And I'm not here to say that isn't valuable, because it is very valuable, but there's also a very valuable other stream of research that I think was shown very well today was the applied sense, and that sometimes we address the question through the best method that is useful for us. So in Elisa's case, that's going to be talking to people on the ground. It's going to be asking people and having listening sessions. That's the best way to understand, is this resilience hub going to be beneficial, or what's the issues with public transit? And so I think sometimes we can be very lost in our own little methodology world. And so I encourage all of you to try to maybe address the research questions from perhaps a different methodological standpoint, but also perhaps even a simpler methodology. Sometimes simple methodologies are valuable. Just because it's simple doesn't make it wrong. And I have to keep pushing even my own students to remember that. And so I encourage all of you, because not just that simple could be better, but also simple connects better back to policy and connects back to stakeholders. It makes it a little easier to describe, makes it more valuable for practitioners who are going and using it. They're not going to necessarily understand a multi-criteria decision-making optimization model that integrates pipelines of AI, large language models. That's a lot. It's a lot, right? So if you are using that, distill it to something that's usable. If you're not using it, show the value of simplicity.
Thank you very much. Well, you can spell the piece, I presume. So first, let's thank the panel again. Excellent job. I also want to thank Dr. de Guzman for brain shouting this event today, and also invite her to come up and take over the reins and direct traffic in terms of the next steps here, or next events in today's schedule.
Sure, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. This is really exciting for me.